Hey everyone, I just finished work, so I'm sorry I look a little disheveled today, but was kind of an intense day at work. I wanted to focus on one of the questions that I received from you guys that really focused on an introduction to, or a little bit more about storytelling and why it's important. I know I had mentioned that in passing in a list of things to learn how to do when you are trying to learn a new skill set, soft skills that are going to be really important and helpful for you, especially when you're a new professional entering the workforce. What should you demand as part of your learning experiences? One of those soft skills was get feedback about how you tell stories, or really try to incorporate that into your learning. I would use your rotations as a lab and get your preceptor involved with you to give you feedback about how you're telling stories, how you are presenting yourself, and how you are able to communicate. So why are stories important? Stories are really important when you think about trying to grab people's attention or when you're trying to relay a message, because your brain thinks at 400 words per minute. And then we can only speak at maybe a max of 125 words per minute. So what does your brain do with all of that time and space and processing power? Usually this gets absorbed in distractibility. If you're able to paint a picture though with someone, you're able to focus in their mental machinery and use that to your advantage to relay a message, teach a message, and communicate something, especially in pharmacy when we're talking about medications that's deeply complex. So I'd say this is actually something quite useful to use with your patients as well in your counseling sessions. So elements of a story, or things that I think are important to explore in storytelling as you're trying to expand your own skill set, would be recognizing the power of experience. So how could you turn your own experience into helpful stories? So one thing that I do to try to teach students about iatrogenesis and its importance and cross-translatability across their practice is to bring up my own experience. So I received an email from a physician that had some very interesting thought processes housed in it. And what it did is it really solidified for me the importance of truly recognizing the unique ecosystems that we have housed as electronic health records. What I mean by that is how people use electronic health records often is really driven by a lot of assumption of what the system is or is not doing. Now, the situation they painted for me was that they recognized that they had prescribed an interacting drug for a patient, and they didn't necessarily get an alert for that interaction. Now, they were relaying some confusion of why wouldn't we have an alert specifically for that type of interaction, because at a different facility that they had worked at, they were really used to seeing a specific type of alert, and they had become reliant on using the clinical decision support system in making prescribing decisions. Now, that is a very reactive way to treat to treat our electronic prescribing systems. And I think it does not get to the heart of clinical content. You have to be so wary of. That's driven by organization level policy, as well as kind of different attitudes about, are we trying to combat alert fatigue? Are we trying to only have the most important alerts in the system? That way someone isn't inundated with alerts. And we would hope that many different types of interactions or types of clinical care actually may not make sense to have an alert, because we would trust their clinical expertise instead of trying to have an alert for everything. When we look at our current tools that we have for clinical decision support, often these are interruptive pop-up alerts, which can be a little bit of a dangerous way to present really important clinical information to our providers, because one, it's interruptive in a workflow. Two, if we have too much clinical decision support, the concern is that we might inadvertently turn off critical thinking. And then thirdly, how do we really, how do we truly use the right tool for the job? For instance, maybe an alert doesn't make sense for that type of interaction. And because it might be one of the things that, it's easy to make the right decision and have, and maybe those things aren't commonly prescribed. So maybe it's an unanticipated type of interaction to even build an alert for. I think that story is fascinating because one, I'm relaying a situation that happened, so that clues you in and grabs your attention. Three, it's trying to communicate a broader concept. And then four, it kind of shows you how I think, or different pieces of my experience of me interacting with that story. So that's not the full story, but wanted to kind of give a pearl of information there to kind of lead us through this discussion. Additionally, stories should be very time bound. So kind of, you want to be able to paint a picture for someone using a time marker. So I said, if you want to say, a few months ago I was recognizing, or you might say, when I was in a certain place, or finally you might even give a certain date. So like yesterday, or this time last year, June 27th, like really getting specific. That kind of helps guide the reader to kind of that mindset where they're starting to paint the picture. Also by time bound, I think what's helpful too is to set the stage. So starting with a very broad picture of what you're going to tell someone, getting more narrow and pointed to what you're going to tell them. So going from broad to specific, and then talking about the passion behind that statement. So the passion in my story that I started to set up is truly that I feel like everyone should recognize that they maybe have an inherent assumption or bias in the background of how they're using healthcare technology. And that can really impact their ability to care for patients, or their known ability of how to navigate a system. And critical thinking can never be replaced by clinical decision support. So how do we put in specific interventions or self-checks to make sure that we're not on autopilot, or assuming care is happening, or assuming things are happening in an electronic health record that perhaps aren't really in play. So again, broad, specific, and then passionate are like the three tiers I typically like to bring into my stories. Now, stories are very important in interviews. Interviews have shifted to be more behavioral based, where showing how you've used a skill is becoming more and more important. But we're seeing another shift where not only are behavioral interviews important, but your thought process is during the event is more of interest to the interview panel of late. So and stories help you encapsulate that by folding in what you learned during a situation. It showcases how you reflect, how you learn, shows your inner monologue and your personality. It typically does illustrate your problem solving, how you communicate under pressure, and then also how you navigate complexity. And if you can bring in your thought process or things behind the scenes that are going through your head when you're telling a story, that can be quite powerful. Now, I did want to kind of wrap this up with discussing the importance of pausing. Now, pausing, because your brain is thinking so quickly and you're trying to now tap into someone's visualization or imagination capabilities as well, pausing gives that interruptive effect where if someone has tuned out because their mind is processing, it kind of brings people back to you. So it can be a tool to help get people back into your story. So help people get back into your story, help create that emphasis, and then also provides you an opportunity to think or how to frame something. So I would highly recommend taking some time to pause, finding those key moments where you're about to say something deeply important, and let the person that you're speaking to connect from or disconnect from any distraction and receive your key point. Stories are going to really help you in not only communicating with others, interviewing, but also connecting with patients, becoming really effective in your ability to navigate even something like networking, becoming memorable, because we are so connected. And it's so easy to reach out to someone. It does create a level of noise. And so to cut through the noise people are inundated with is to try to share something personal or try to share a story or a learning that clicks in someone's mind, something quotable, provides them a sound bite to associate you with. And those are the things that really are needed to stand out in this tricky environment where we do have more connection with people than perhaps we have had ever before. And the importance of standing out truly becomes perhaps a story problem, as far as that could be a way to solve for becoming memorable.